when I read this book by Simon Winchester called The Professor and the Madman. And it's about James Murray. It's a nonfiction book about James Murray, who was one of the compilers of the Oxford English Dictionary. And as he's compiling all these entries, he notices that there's one person has submitted over 10,000 entries into the OED, and so he wants to look him up to thank him, and he does, and discovers that this person, whose name is Dr. W.C. Minor, is an inmate in an asylum for the criminally insane. And I just thought, what a wild story. And then it didn't take long for me to think, life is stories. I mean, everything's stories. It's what holds us all together, or holds it all together. It's how we make sense of the world around us. So Shakespeare Dharma is my story about the two major influences in my life and how somehow they have helped me make some sense of it all. I've also designed this for an audience who may not be that familiar with Buddhist teachings or Shakespeare. So let's get down to some definitions. Shakespeare Dharma. There are many definitions for Dharma. Most basically, it is one of the three refuges, the pillars of Buddhist practice, which are Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And Buddha, very simply, the most simple definition, Buddha, teacher, the teacher. Dharma, the teachings. And then Sangha, the spiritual community that's essential for practice. And what's wonderful about doing this today is because there are many people in this room that I'm looking at who are all part of my story. And so I have some brothers from the Gay Buddhist Fellowship here. I have two friends from high school, and colleagues from the school formerly known as French American, which is now called International High School. And who else? And then just a lot of friends in the back. Dharma does have many more definitions than that. For me, it's Dharma is the teachings of the Buddha. Dharma is putting those teachings into practice. And Dharma is also the path that practice has led me. Dharma also, a definition of Dharma, is universal truth or universal law. For me, in this talk, the two definitions that are pertinent to this talk are truth and then refuge. And So making a comparison or a connection between Shakespeare and Buddhist teachings is not new territory. There are a number of people who have written about it. Number of books. Dave Rico's "To Thine Own Self Be True." Shakespeare as Therapist and Spiritual Guide. The Buddha and the Bard, where Shakespeare's stage meets Buddhist scriptures. Shakespeare meets the Buddha. And then this really provocative one called Whacking Buddha by this guy, Mark LaMonica. So for me, it's really easy. The most easy way that that the connection can be made between Shakespeare and Buddha's teachings is the truth, the essential truth about human nature that exists in both of them. Oftentimes, it's tempting to sometimes kind of force interpretation or meaning to make that connection. So when I present those connections in this talk, I will at first be putting them into the context, their original context, and then just making my personal connections that I've come up with to the Dharma. It's also, if you're talking about interpretation, you're talking about meaning and how meaning evolves and evolves along with our experience, our life experience and growth. So it has a lot to do with ambiguity. When you're the very many ways that you can take a set of words and interpret the meaning from them, and Shakespeare revels in ambiguity. Just recently, I don't think I have the book here. I was made aware of a scholar, Shakespeare scholar named Stephen Booth, and he first wrote an essay called he wrote an essay on Shakespeare's sonnets. He went on to write a whole book of excruciatingly close reading of the sonnets, and so as far as like ambiguity or multiple meanings, there are sections in his sonnets analysis where he will take one word from a Shakespeare sonnet and point out 5 different meanings for that one word, which then changes that line totally in interpretation. Another wonderful, that's the sonnets, but Shakespeare, I think he really excelled, if not really introduced ambiguity into characters in theater. From what I understand, Hamlet aside, the original source material for Hamlet was a 12th century piece called Deeds of the Danes. It was written in Latin. And in that, it tells the story of a prince. But this prince and father who's killed by his uncle, and the throne is usurped. But in the original source material, it's very clear. There's no ambiguity. The prince is feigning madness. Whereas you get to Hamlet, and you know all the way through, is he crazy or is he just acting crazy? And so so that's what I have to say about meanings. My familiarity with Shakespeare goes all the way back to the early 70s. But and my introduction or my familiarity with Buddhism came much later. And as I learned more and more about Buddha's teachings, I would often be reminded of Shakespeare. And this is a case in point. A few years back, I took a workshop called A Year to Live. And it's based on this book by Stephen Levine called A Year to Live. And the workshop was a year-long workshop. Stephen Levine worked with the dying and the hospice movement. And he wrote this book because he realized that so many people meet that moment of transition unprepared, with a lot of unresolved issues in their life, or just not, just not on a practical level prepared for leaving the planet. So he wrote this book, and and it kind of goes month by month. It imagines, it asks you to imagine that you have 1 year to live, and and so that's how it's set up. And in one of the chapters in the book called Name That Tune, he talks about how in different indigenous societies, often the young person goes off on a vision quest. And one of the things that can happen in that vision quest is coming up with a healing song, creating your own personal healing song, which then is often sung at that moment of transition, of death. And so, so Stephen Levine invites the reader to find their own healing song. And I realized, oh my goodness, I had already written it, and it turns out to be the first song text I ever set to music from Cymbeline, Shakespeare's Cymbeline. And I realized that just the first verse of the song was a perfect death song. Fear no more the heat of the sun, nor the furious winter's rages. Thou thy worldly task hast done, home art gone, and ta'en thy wages. Golden lads and girls all must, as chimney sweepers, come to dust. That's as far as I'm going to go with that. But home art gone, and ta'en thy wages. Thou thy worldly task hath done. Home art gone, and ta'en thy wages. For me, that's just a really nifty little definition of karma. Karma is often misunderstood and misused term, but the definition of karma is action. And what it's about is the cause and effect of our actions, that every action we do has an effect. So those are the wages that are taken home in this song. So how did I end up? Oh, right, and I wrote that. I wrote it as part of a member of a Shakespeare troupe called Burnham Wood. So how did I get to be a member of Burnham Wood? When I graduated from high school, I went to San Francisco State, and I chose English as my major. Now, I think many people have had the good fortune of having an instructor in high school that inspires you, that gets you fired up about their particular subject, whether it's science, math, arts, and inspires you to continue in that area of knowledge. I chose to be an English major at San Francisco State. I chose to be an English major at San Francisco State because of this man, James Franciscus. He wasn't an English teacher, but he played an English teacher in the television series Mr. Novak. And he did a lot of television. He had a few forays into feature-length films. Some of you might remember him from Beneath the Planet of the Apes. I almost said Beneath the Valley of the Dolls. Beneath the Planet of the Apes, okay? Yeah, anyway. I don't know why I bothered to have this framed, but... Okay, digression, sorry. I was going to have like a little sign made up that said, I digress. But when I heard that Tim Burton was going to be doing a remake of Planet of the Apes and that Mark Wahlberg was going to be in it, I went, oh my God, Mark Wahlberg in a loincloth. I can hardly wait. And God damn it, if Tim Burton didn't have him dressed in this spacesuit from toe all the way up to his neck. Anyway, okay. Where was I? Oh, yes. You see, oh, look, I'm already on to the second page. So, one of the requirements of an English major at State was you had to take a Shakespeare class. And I had never connected to Shakespeare in my English classes at Las Lomas High School in Walnut Creek. I had connected in wonderful ways with Shakespeare in the drama classes, and we did our teacher, Miss Murray, took all the scenes of the rude mechanicals in Midsummer Night's Dream, and we just did those. You know, these work people who decide to put on a play for the wedding banquet of Theseus and Hippolyta, and their rehearsal, and then finally the performance, which is really, when I read that, I mean, the whole thing is a wonderful kind of deconstruction of theater. Don't you agree, Michelle? It is. I mean, it's like they go as they're going through trying to figure out how to tell this story. They're basically kind of negating every element. You know, they're like identifying and throwing away everything that makes theater. So it's really marvelous. Also, I don't know how many of you have ever had Midsummer Night's Dream cast or performed in your high school, but inevitably, I was cast as Bottom, and you know, I have this theory that it always goes to the biggest ham in the high school, which I think I was. So I had this Shakespeare requirement. I kept on postponing it and postponing it and postponing it. And it's one of my other favorite quotes from Cymbeline is, "Fortune brings in some boats that are not steered." And that's been kind of true for most of my adult life. And so I heard about this Shakespeare class that was being offered. It was a lecture class, but it was 6 units instead of 3. And that's because it was taught by Edward Van Alstyne, who's known to his friends, family, and colleagues as Van. And Van his whole approach was embodying the plays. He felt the fast track to getting over that strangeness of the language is by acting it out with book in hand, moving around, not just sitting in the class and reading it, but moving around, props encouraged. And so the lecture class was three units, and then it was broken up into various groups who met for another 3 hours off campus, outside of class, and would act out the play, whatever play we were studying. And then we would come back, and there were no papers. That's probably why they let him go. It also, my freshman year at State was the student strike, so that was kind of a wild introduction to academia. But no papers. Our final was, we divided King Lear up among the whole class, and we performed it for ourselves and friends, family at the what is it? I forget the name of it. I think it starts with the chalet or at Stern Grove. There's a I forget what they call it. Anyway, and I got to play King Lear at his maddest, and I think I made an impression on Van because Van invited me to become a part of a reading group that he and his wife had put together and a bunch of friends, and they did these Shakespeare readings. We would meet at their house. These readings happened in people's houses. Um, oh, I forgot to bring it. Anyway, I had the actual um, the the only real documentation that we have of the reading group and the Shakespeare troupe that it would become was through a master's thesis. One of our members, Mark Reese, wrote for his master's in humanistic psychology at Sonoma State, and it was called Shakespeare and Everyday Life. And it's basically, it tells the whole story. And I was going to just, wave it to you, but one of the things he mentioned was these readings, there was always wine and marijuana, and good cheer and food, and we would recast almost each act, because it wasn't so much about the character. It was about entering the world of the play. Letting that language inhabit you. And as Mark put in his thesis, the readers were encouraged to suspend any preconceptions and to show the text and to allow the text to direct the flow of meanings. One stretched out, exaggerated, and abandoned oneself to the extremes indicated in Shakespeare's language. There was also this other quality to these readings. It was really, this was outside of the classroom. It was really an approach akin to that these readings were more like a mind-body practice than theater. And Mark, who, another little digression, but a little sidebar, Mark Reese went on to be one of the first people trained by Moshe Feldenkrais in awareness and movement, his whole movement therapy, and one of the head practitioners of awareness through movement. And he wrote, he's the author of Feldenkrais' biography, although unfortunately he died before it was finished, but another member of our Burnham Wood crew, Clifford Skoog, finished, and it's published. I think there's supposed to be a part 2, but anyway, that was Mark Reese. He died untimely death of cancer in his 50s. And but he really, this is, when I say that thanks to him, we have kind of a record of not only the particulars, but the spirit of what we were doing. And so he said, this is what the readings were. By reading aloud and acting out Shakespeare's language, we inhabit the universe of his plays and bring Shakespeare into our everyday lives. Open and quiet receptivity permits the world of the play to reveal its riches. Only when ourselves are quiet may the word be heard. Stillness must reclaim the verse. We lend the text our ear by reading the play aloud. We lend the language our body and our voice in order to realize the music and movement of the worlds within the plays. By listening to each other, we establish a world among ourselves sufficient to share the worlds of Shakespeare's plays. The plays, in turn, offer themselves, sharing their landscapes, characters, and meanings. By dwelling in the world of Shakespeare's language, we come to a knowledge of another reality, another knowledge of ourselves. And so it wasn't, so oftentimes we would begin a reading with more kind of meditative exercises rather than, we didn't do theater warm-ups at all. It was more creating a relaxed and open receptivity for the language to inhabit. That went on for a number of years. I think for me the most kind of the culmination of the reading experience is what I like to call the acid Lear. One of our members had a house up in the Berkeley Hills, and we all dropped acid and acted out King Lear. And we began, we came on to the acid by chanting the Padmasambhava, Tibetan Padmasambhava chant. Om Ahum Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi Hum. It's acknowledging Padmasambhava, who not only brought Buddhism to Tibet, but he chased out all the demons too. So the story goes. Okay. So, and it took us 5.5 hours, but we got through it. There'd be times when there'd be this, say a line, and then we'd just kind of be rolling on the ground laughing. There's a lot of funny lines in Lear, the difference between men and men. Yeah. So, hey, next page already. This is where I have to. So, I graduated from college. I got my BA. I ended up moving down to Southern California, to Santa Ana. I was the live-in attendant for a father of some friends of mine who was a psychiatrist in Santa Ana. And had MS. And I was down there for about 3 months. And I was down there for 1 month. It took, I was there for a month before I discovered Laguna Beach and Newport Beach and the whole gay community. This was like 1973. Gay liberation was just getting going, and there were all these gay social groups and political groups. And I also ended up falling in love with a piano bar. Oh, you know what? I forgot something that I have to go back and I just have to say, I just have to say, life is funny. I'm a great admirer of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, and I'm always like bemused and delighted when things that are in my head manifest themselves in surprising ways. So I got to actually meet James Franciscus. Well, okay, I didn't actually meet him. I kind of ran into him. Well, actually, precisely, I almost ran him down in my car. Seriously. I was driving down Ashby past the Claremont Hotel, and I knew that there was a celebrity tennis tournament and that he happened to be in it. So I'm just driving down Ashby when suddenly this tan blonde guy comes J-bounding in front of my car. I had to kind of pull on the brakes, and there he was. It was James Franciscus. And he looked at me and he smiled with this kind of, sorry, glad you didn't run over me. And then he just bounded off. And anyway, I couldn't pass up sharing that with you. Okay. Oh, and something else. There's one other element to this story. There's one other element to the story, and that's music. And I was a kind of budding songwriter, and my lacklustrous music career began in high school. My two major influences were Alan Sherman, the song parodist, hello mother, hello father. And I would write song parodies for the rallies, and sometimes I would, on commission, write personal song parodies directed to certain students. And then also another early influence was Tom Lehrer, political satirist, musical satirist. So when I started writing my own songs with both words and and lyrics. This is an example of it. I was in college when I wrote this. I was inspired one day. I spilled some coffee on the floor and very uncharacteristically went to clean it up. And as I was bending over and wiping it up, I thought, if I was the size of a microbe, all I'd need was this coffee stain to live on. If I were the size of a microbe, I could comfortably live off a coffee stain. Couldn't I? And my problems would be proportionately smaller in proportion to my proportionately smaller brain. Wouldn't they? And I'd be accepting and honest. I'd speak just the truth, which would be very wise, 'cause creatures that size can't afford to tell lies. And when you're the size of a microbe, well, you don't have to shower, you don't have to shave. And the code that you follow's genetic, which seems to me a more civilized way to behave. Wouldn't you agree? I know I should be happy I'm human, but with all of my accessories I hardly feel complete. I just can't shake the thought when I walk down the street. I've worn shoes for so long I've lost track of my feet. But if I were the size of a microbe, I could comfortably live off a coffee stain. Couldn't I? Oh, yeah, it's okay. When I gave this talk, a part of this talk at the Gay Buddhist Fellowship, I didn't know what to do. Do you clap afterwards, or do you bow after I finish a song? So yeah, so when I was down in Laguna Beach, I met this tan and blonde, also piano bar player, and I fell in love with him. And then I moved back to San Francisco. And I guess it was kind of one of those out of sight, out of mind, or maybe he just wasn't that into me. But back then you wrote letters, and I would write him letters and wait by the mailbox and no letter. And then I'd write another letter and no letters in return. By that time, I was back in the city. I took my BA in English and got a job washing dishes at the Castro Cafe in the Castro. And I was usually there late at night. I would clean up after the place closed down. So there are many nights where I'm crying into the soap suds while listening to Donny Hathaway sing "Someday We'll All Be Free" on the jukebox. So back to my emotional security. I decided that, thank you for indulging me with this. The important thing was I lost total track with that reading group. I had a different number, a different address. I didn't have theirs. We were separated. And so one day I decided, he's not answering my letters. I'm just going to hitchhike down to Laguna Beach and show up on his doorstep. So there I was with my thumb out at the on-ramp at South Van Ness. And that was back in the days where people hitchhiked and people actually picked you up and you could hitchhike. And who should pull up but Mark Reese. And he goes, where are you going? I go, well, I was going down to Laguna Beach. He says, you know, I said, are you still doing the reading group? He goes, not only that, we're performing. We have a Shakespeare troupe. It's called Birnam Wood. And we're doing a production of Henry VI, Part 2, More and Less. And our Warwick dropped out. And it's a small part. You could be Warwick. And that's how I began. I became a member of Birnam Wood. Birnam Wood. Yeah, it was a Shakespeare company. And that's where my music came into play, because one of the things is totally bare bones theater, no sets. So music became our setting, and we usually had music playing throughout. Sometimes people would criticize us for that. Sometimes we drowned out the actors, but anyway, the next play that we did was Cymbeline, and I just very easily fell into setting the song texts of the plays to music. I was like that was my job among many. The other I lost my flyers, but the flyer for this show, this talk, is the image there is of Milarepa, was he Tibetan? Anybody out there? Was he? No? For Veronique? Yeah. He revered poet and songwriter, and he's very popular because his is a story of redemption. He was a murderer. He murdered many people. His uncle, when his father died, this sounds familiar. When his father died, his uncle took all of their wealth and fortune, and so Milarepa's mother convinced him to study the black arts, which he did quite successfully enough to murder hundreds of people. And yet he eventually found the Dharma, and it really hard, hard-tasked teacher who put him really through many Sisyphean type tasks, and eventually he became this revered Dharma teacher and songwriter. But what struck me the first time I saw his image was him holding his hand up to his ear. And I went, yeah, that's what songwriting is like for me. It's not about making something up. It's about listening, and then what comes next. And so I had this facility of setting Shakespeare's verse to music, because if I spent any time with Shakespeare's verse, I would start to hear music because it was in there. You know, it might not be the same music as other people find there, but that's the thing about Shakespeare's verse. It's full of music and rhythm. And then I want to share you this quote. Once again from Mark's thesis. And so the one part of the thesis was, there's a part about reading, then there was a whole part about performance, and then reception of performance. So really whatever little documents we have of reviews that we got were just in Mark's. And so I'm looking it over, and we like the best review we ever got. The person who really got us wrote an article about us, mentioned us in an article. It was, I think, in the Shakespeare Quarterly, winter 1976. The issue was devoted to Shakespeare in California, and he wrote an article about Shakespeare in the Bay Area, and I'm looking over, and I realize, oh my God, it was Stephen Booth. Stephen Booth, the foremost scholar on Shakespeare's sonnets. And not only did he see one of our plays, it becomes evident from his article that he followed us. He went and saw all of our shows. And I had no idea, he never spoke to us. So this is what Stephen Booth had to say about Birnam Wood. And it just captures exactly what we were doing. He speaks earlier of the improbable, improbably named, and improbably successful gypsy company called Birnam Wood. That brings me to Birnam Wood and their Henry VI. Each member of the company, whose members are strictly anonymous, takes responsibility for everything from direction to ticket selling. I don't know who they are or where they come from. They put on only Shakespeare and only rarely perform Shakespeare. They do so anywhere and at unpredictable times. A few days before a performance, local papers say that Birnam Wood will present one performance of some obscure play in the side reading room of a San Francisco library branch, or in the ping pong room of a neighborhood recreation center in the suburbs. I have nothing but good to say about Birnam Wood, but I have nothing to say that will not make them sound bad. And then he goes into more description, but the actors and the orchestra were the same people. When their cues came up, they left their instruments, hopped up on stage, performed, and then got back to the orchestra whenever and however the plot allowed. The production built to a tightly managed frenzy. Then, just before the conclusive speech, at a point where the players had the plot, the play, and the audience under perfect and perfectly amazing control, they stopped. One of them turned to the audience and said, that was it, and that we should all go home. That does not sound like a production of Henry VI, much less like a good one, and one that was absolutely true to the play, but it was. Yeah. So, like I said, we found the history plays really, really funny. And one of the things that we did that was so great that he mentions in his article is that in these history plays, the body count is just increasing and increasing. And we always thought it was funny. We just laughed at the machinations of the characters and their quest for power. So what we would do is whoever died in the play would, as the play progressed, the first person, there's a scene going on, and a guy who died in the previous scene is wheeled out on a freight dolly, a hand truck, and with a grimace of a strictness of violent death, sometimes like spitting and slobbering out at the audience. And then as the play progressed, more and more would be added. They would just, as a kind of reminder to the I guess the toll of what was happening on the stage. The other thing about Birnam Wood is we all lived together. That was back in the day where there were communes that were created around different artistic pursuits or ideologies. San Francisco had the Diggers and the Coquettes, and down in Southern California there was the Manson family, and so we all lived together. And there's the main house where we rehearsed, and then satellite houses. Oh yeah. Yeah, when he talked about the hand trucks, he said the effect was ludicrous and the audience laughed every time.
common sense says this production was an outrageous and flabby joke, a campy comment on Elizabethan horror chronicles. Common sense is wrong, but I cannot perfectly see why, nor even try to explain in the space available here. So what we had was like kind of bottled lightning, you know. All good things must come to an end. And so I want to talk a little bit about the language itself in the plays. But I'm going to start out with talking about the power of language. Michelle Hayner and I are both have been, and Catherine. I mean, we've both been involved in Shakespeare, Shakespeare activities at the school formerly known as French American, and and we've often had conversations about that language is powerful. It's powerful stuff. And I found, or at least this is a story I like to tell, that because we weren't professionals, because we were just amateurs in the truest sense of the word and lovers of the plays, that we let this language inhabit us. And like Mark said, kind of the seeds to our downfall. There were many factors why the group broke up, but I think part of it is when Mark says, by listening to each other, we establish a world among ourselves sufficient to share the worlds of Shakespeare's plays. So we were creating a relationship through the lens of whatever plays we were performing. And for instance, when we did Twelfth Night, there was kind of an explosion of promiscuity among the group. Everybody was a lot of bed hopping. And then what happened was we had never had a director. And this guy saw our production, one of our productions, and asked if we would let him direct. And we said yes. And he chose a play that we never would have chosen, and he cast it as we never would have cast it. And that play was, am I allowed to say it? This is because it's kind of a state. Okay. So, one of the nice things about Shakespeare, I respect tradition. Okay, one of the things about Shakespeare, there's all these wonderful traditions and superstitions around Shakespeare, and one is about the play that is referred to as the Scottish play. And the idea is you do not say that name in a theater, it's bad, bad luck. So it's like the Scottish play or Mackers instead of the M word. And I think I have a very personal take and understanding of why we have the curse of M. Language is powerful. Theater came from ritual when language was even more powerful. And what we were doing, we were conjuring on that playing stage the very worst instincts of humankind. And we were vulnerable to it. It affected us. Part of the group moved up to Oregon. There were people not speaking to each other, by the time we finished our attempt to mount it. But now I get to talk about what I love about Shakespeare's language. And and that is a little blank verse 101. isn't this? Okay. So there are two types of language in Shakespeare's plays. There's prose and there's blank verse, or there's verse, and sometimes it's blank and sometimes it's rhymes. And in the early plays, prose was spoken by comic characters or low status characters, and then higher status people spoke in blank verse. And blank verse, as most of you probably know, the structure of it is it's an iambic pentameter, 5 iamb beats that go ba bum ba bum ba bum ba bum ba bum. It was Dennis Krasnick and Shakespeare and Company who first introduced the made the connection for me and for for me. Da dun da dun da dun da dun da dun. That's a really familiar beat. What other thing has that kind of rhythm? Yeah, it's the beat of the heart, and so one can think. So iambic pentameter is like the beat of a heart, except when it isn't, and there are times when it isn't. When the rhythm when the rhythm breaks from that regular beat. And I liken it, first of all, it helps, it would be awfully monotonous if it was always iambic pentameter. But also I liken it to, there's this analogy of Japanese rock gardens. That are used for meditation and walking meditation, and they vary the size of the pebbles and the sand, so that as you're walking, you reach another kind of a different coarseness of beneath your feet, and you're suddenly brought to the present. For me, those variations from the iambic beat emphasize a phrase, and yeah, I think it's yeah. In the later plays, Shakespeare plays around with scenes where they may start out in prose, the same characters may be speaking in prose, and then it switches into blank verse. I liken it to the language shifting into a higher gear. The language becomes more heightened. And that's the way I kind of like to look at it in the plays. And being a homosexual of a certain age, I can't help but make a musical theater analogy. So that in musical theater, you wonder, why is everybody bursting out in song? Well, that's just because regular language just can't, is not enough. And so you take it to that heightened level of a song. And so another thing that Dennis Krasnick made me aware of is the idea that one way you can look at it is, and especially in these later plays, if a character is speaking prose, it's from the head, and if it's in blank verse, it's from the heart. And there's a wonderful scene in Twelfth Night where between Viola and Olivia, and who's disguised as a young man, and the scene starts out in prose, and then Viola slips into blank verse, and then suddenly Olivia is speaking in blank verse, and that's the moment in the play where Olivia finds herself falling in love with this young man who turns out to be a young woman. There's a bunch of other stuff I can tell you about blank verse, but we're running short of time. So Yeah. And also, yeah, rhymed couplets. Blank verse is usually not rhymed. If you run across a couplet, it's usually rhymed couplets, usually at the end of the scene. In fact, when these plays were composited and written down in the first folio, that's how. I mean, they weren't. It wasn't broke. They didn't. They didn't write out Act One, Scene One. It was kind of they figured it out as they composited the the plays. So that was always an indication that, oh, this is the end of a scene. But then you get stuff where there's prose, blank verse, rhymed verse, sonnet. Sonnet is like uber, the highest. And that's so wonderful in Romeo and Juliet when they first meet. Their exchange is in sonnet form. So this is like the real deal going on. Yeah. Yeah. So the group disbanded, and I continued, even though we weren't performing, I continued my collaborative relationship with Shakespeare's verse, and I continued just going through the Shakespeare canon and setting song texts to music. I started out, I think, with The Tempest, and then Midsummer Night's Dream, and As You Like It, just wherever I could find the text of a song. And also, my favorite pastime was just curling up with a play and daydreaming it, imagining, creating the world of the play in my head. So that's where I was in the early 80s. And they say that death is the great teacher. And for many of us in this room, it came in the form of the AIDS epidemic. And for me, I bookend those terrible first years of the AIDS epidemic when it was like a death sentence. I bookend it with the deaths of two of the men who I was closest to. My friend Mark in 1986 and my friend Peter in 1993. When Mark died, in fact, I just recently wrote a song about Mark. I finally got around to honoring him. And the lyric begins, it's just we were so new to death that caught us by surprise. And clumsily we learned to die and grieve and eulogize. So this is where I learned the difference between escape and refuge. When Mark died, let's just say that I did not handle my grief in the most skillful fashion. I turned to what was relieving me of that grief. Oh, that's the other thing. Speaking of teaching, what AIDS taught me was to put somebody else's needs before my own. But it also taught me grief. I'd never experienced grief before. And so my way was to just try to dissolve it with alcohol and methamphetamines. And after about 8 years, 6 years or so, turned out that wasn't working. And I'm so glad I got that behind me. So that when Peter died, I decided to take a different tact. And for some reason, I just picked up a copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. And I started reading through them. And the first revelation was, the sonnets as we know them were published by Thomas Thorpe in 1609 without Shakespeare's permission. Up until then, from what we know, for how the story goes, he wrote them and gave them to friends privately. But Thomas Thorpe gathered them all up and published them. And he created the sequence that we enjoy now. And basically, he was sequencing them by theme. But the revelation for me was that the first 126 sonnets are addressed to a young man. It's a poet addressing a young man, or it's about the young man. And especially if you're, things are so much wonderfully different now, with heated rivalry and Brokeback Mountain and Passing Stranger, Fellow Travelers, all of these, now you can see now we can see images of our love, and so here, it's just like, oh my God, here I was all these years sitting on a cache of poetry about the love of one man for another, without knowing it. So what's really cool is the way they're sequenced. The sonnets 1 through 17 is as if the poet was commissioned to I imagine the story I tell my this is like my version of Shakespeare in Love, but it's as if he was commissioned to write these sonnets to convince this young wealthy man to get married, because if he doesn't get married, his beauty is going to go, he's going to take his beauty with him to the grave, until he gets to sonnet 18. And in sonnet 18, he says, hey, there's one other way that your beauty can live on, and that's in the immortal lines to time of my verse. So that was sonnet 18, and it was the first sonnet I set to music in memory of my friend Peter. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's length has all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall doth brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life. So long lives this, and this gives life to thee. To thee. Now, at the time, I had gotten a job as the maintenance person, facilities person at French American International School, and I was the sole person. I set up for events. I drove the kids around in the van. I did the repairs. But I also, because of my background in community-based arts, I immediately connected with the arts community. And I suddenly found a new collaborative situation. And so after I set that to music, I started setting more sonnets to music, but also looking back over my earlier work and seeing the connections that it had to that spoke to the AIDS epidemic, and with the themes of love and loss and grief, and the cyclical nature of life and impermanence. As I was reading through the poems, I got to Sonnet 30, and something profound and remarkable and powerful happened. Sonnet 30 goes, when to the sessions of sweet silent thought, I summon up a remembrance of things past. I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes, new wail my dear time's waste. And then I came to this quatrain. Then can I drown an eye unused to flow for precious friends hid in death's dateless night. And in that moment, I no longer felt alone in my grief. I didn't have the word for it then, but there's a word for it in Buddhism, karuna, compassion. It's one of the 4 Brahma Viharas, the 4 flavors of love, of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. If you go through life exhibiting those approaching situations with those qualities, you are guaranteed enlightenment. And because karuna, compassion, it's about knowing that you're not alone in your suffering. When you suffer, karuna reminds you that you're not alone, that at the very moment there are thousands, hundreds and thousands of people experiencing that same suffering. And that is when Shakespeare became my refuge. And I saw Shakespeare as my path through grief. And we're going to take a little break now. I'm way over time. Eric, if this is like another half hour, can we do that? Okay. I know how good you are. So, and I'll welcome feedback, but I already know I need to, time management was always a problem with me as a teacher. But if you just want to get up and stretch now, and yeah. And I will call you back with the sound of the Tibetan chime in 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay, folks. Thank you again for sticking this out. So, what I ended up doing once I had chosen Shakespeare to get me through my grief was I put together. I looked, I looked at the sonnets. I looked at stuff I'd written before, and I put together a song cycle, and that friends of mine, staff from the school, students from the school, all worked on. You have to realize I'm the maintenance person. I'm not even on the teaching staff, and that's what kind of French American was back then was a lot more warmer and fuzzier, and but it is today. but and a testament to it was that not only did I was able to create and perform this song cycle. French American had a continuing education program at that time for everybody on the staff. That included me. And one of the things that I realized, having lived through the last 10 years of the AIDS epidemic and being healthy, and it's like, what do I want to, I'm alive. What do I want to do with this? And I decided to go back to school. And French American paid for me to go back to school. And because it's a French school, you get very soon I had 5 weeks of paid vacation every year, and that plus no for me it was 5. The teachers got a lot more, yeah, because they got holidays and but so I would use the master's degree. The master's program at San Francisco State. Just after a 23-year absence, I'm back at school, and so the classes were in the late afternoon and evenings, and I would use half days of my vacation to use that time to attend the classes, and then I graduated and got a degree in interdisciplinary creative arts, and I always think of it as I snuck through the back door. And I started teaching there. And just little by little, I was like way past part-time for the first 8 years of teaching there. But then slowly I introduced video production and then first in 8th, 9th, then up to 10th grade. And then French American has 2 diploma programs, the French Baccalaureate and the International Baccalaureate. And the International Baccalaureate, in their arts, they had just started a pilot program of film. And finally, I was able to say to the administration, hey, my 10th grade students are really super duper. Wouldn't it be great if they could continue their formal education in film? And they said yes. And so then I ended up creating the film program at French American, and I just had lunch with her about a month ago, 3 weeks back. Jane Camblin was the head of the school then, and I I have so much gratitude because she was at the helm. She let that happen and encouraged it. And, you have people who change the course of your life, like Van Alstyne. And anyway, so yeah. So now I was a teacher. And that's when I ended up getting reintroduced to the Dharma. I think anybody who has become involved in Buddhism or practices Buddhism, I think one of the initial motivations is they're just tired of suffering. And here's this thing that's all about ending suffering. And I wasn't too long living on this planet before I came to the conclusion that there are two types of people in the world, the damaged and the damaged beyond repair. And so I was in the damaged category, and I just spent most of my adult life trying to figure out some way of feeling good about myself, or some way of solving the hurt. And the Bay Area was like was one of the centers for not only the human potential movement, but the drug culture and psychedelics and all of that. And believe me, I tried everything. I tried everything but rolfing and heroin. Well, okay, I did snort heroin that one time in a jazz club in the marina, but I was already high on MDA at the time, so it doesn't really count. But when I was teaching, at one point, there's a whole secular mindfulness in the schools program. And so our school got interested in it, and we had a workshop. Somebody came in from mindful classrooms and gave a workshop to the teachers and talked about how some of these secular meditation, none of the teachings, but just kind of meditation as a form of stress relief. And although I felt at the time that it could possibly be a sly form of classroom management. But for me, I felt like I started getting interested in the teaching. I just thought, I think it's more important that I learn this stuff and then bring it into the classroom that way, rather than having the kids. Okay, everybody. Oh, anyway. Uh-oh. It's a bad sign. Anyway, so, yeah. So, one of my first introductions was Thich Nhat Hanh's The Heart of Buddha's Teachings. It was a really beautiful introduction to Buddhism. And yeah, so as I studied Buddhism, first off, three refreshing things about Buddhism. First, what is it? All right. Oh, first, there's a story about someone approaching the Buddha and saying, "Are you a man or are you divine?" And him saying, "I'm neither. I'm just awake." And so he was woke, and he wanted everybody else to be woke too. And it just hurts my heart so much that has been turned into a pejorative for a significant population of this country. Second really refreshing thing about the Buddha, he said, don't follow what I'm saying just because I'm saying it. Listen to what I'm saying and then look at your life and see if it holds true for your life experience. Isn't that refreshing? Third refreshing thing about Buddhism. And this is kind of comparing to many forms of Christianity. In Christianity, the idea is that we are born with original sin. We're born broken, and that only through Jesus Christ can we be healed. Whereas in Buddhism, the message is we are all born with Buddha nature, and it's just our opportunity to discover that and nurture it and pass it along. Nice. So I'm not going to go into the one aspect of Buddhism that'll kind of apply to stuff in this talk is the Four Noble Truths, which is, the story goes Buddha was Prince Siddhartha Gautama, led a sheltered, privileged life inside these castle walls, but he had curiosity, and he wanted to see what was happening outside. And so he went, the story goes, 3 times. The first time he goes out and he goes, "What's that? What's that person?" And the person who was with him said, "Oh, he's an old person. He's like, he's lost his faculties." And the second time he goes out and he sees somebody who's ill. "Oh, that person is sick. He's dying." And then the next time he goes out and he sees a dead person. And so he comes back and he goes, "Gosh, there's all this suffering in the world." And he decided to renounce his privilege and just, he had the kind of modest goal of ending suffering for all sentient beings. And at first he did a severe ascetic practice, almost to the point where he starved himself to death. And there's a wonderful story about Sujata, this woman who finds him. She thinks he's like a demon on the side of the road. She offers him some rice water and rice milk, and revives him. And that's when he realizes, maybe there's a middle path. Maybe there's a way that you can end suffering and still be a part of the world. And so he sat for, was it 40? How long did he sit under the Bodhi tree? And finally achieved enlightenment. Actually, Buddha, oftentimes people talk about the definition of Buddha is enlightened, but it's more precisely awakened. And when he became awakened to the true nature of life, he came up with the Four Noble Truths, which are the truth of suffering, number 1, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and then the path to the practice to achieve that. In contemporary, or one of the nice contemporary way of looking at it is shit happens, we make it worse. It doesn't have to be that way. Here's how. And so it's like that first noble truth. I think people, when they're first introduced to it, they have a little problem with suffering. You mean like the whole point of, life is suffering? I don't know if I can really get behind that. But as I've listened to teachings, there are suffering. The word is dukkha, and it's often translated as suffering, but often translated as suffering. But there are more useful, I've found, terms, which is unsatisfactoriness. It's talking about life. It's like the unsatisfactoriness, the unreliability of life. Basically, that life isn't like, it doesn't turn out how you would always like to have it turn out. And so So yeah, so I mean, for me, it's all about the other saying that they have is that pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. So you see, really, we have little control over conditions in our life, but we have total control of how we respond to those conditions. And a teacher was once asked, "How would you sum up your teachings?" And he said, "Appropriate response." And I can't tell you how much that has helped me. First, acknowledging, you know, the just how freeing it is to accept the fact that things are the way they are. There's another kind of mantra, modern mantra that I first learned from Vinnie Ferraro. Right now, it's like this. It's like when you're rushing to get to work and the tire's flat, you could spend a lot of time just like, and, but you can save yourself a lot of suffering by just saying, okay, right now it's like this. What do I have to do next? So yeah, the Four Noble Truths. So as I learned learned more about Buddhism, and then I retired from teaching, and I was amazed by I suddenly went into an unprecedented period of. I would go for years and years without even picking up the guitar, which you can kind of tell by my playing today. But I hadn't written an original song, which I mean by both music and lyrics, in like 30 years. And I suddenly was filled with music and filled with music and rhyme. And so at one point, I decided to revisit a Shakespeare garden, revisit and revise it. And this time, I'd written a lot more material in the interim, but also kind of bringing in a kind of Dharma awareness into it, not explicitly, but it's there. And the one decision I made, the original Shakespeare Garden it was a song cycle, very general, and I decided to tell a specific story with this Shakespeare Garden. I took my first breath in San Francisco, and I really hope to take my last breath in San Francisco. And this is my home. I've lived through so much history that I'm part of its history, and its history is part of me. And it's just I feel so blessed or so grateful that to have this feeling of home, and so grateful that I'm in a situation where I can still afford to live here. So I decided to tell. So I wanted to be my love letter. I just turned 75. And this might be my chance to finally deliver my love letter to San Francisco. So I decided to make it very specific, Shakespeare Garden, very specific to time and place. And so it tells the story of two young gay men who meet in San Francisco in the early 80s and fall in love, and whose lives are interrupted by the AIDS epidemic, told completely in Shakespeare's verse. That's also what's known as an elevator pitch. But that's it. And when I did that, it started to take on a life of its own. It started like little orphaned pieces of music that didn't have a home suddenly found their home. Just all sorts of and I was writing new material. How thrilling it was for me to be 75 years old, 73, 72, and still writing new material. My friend Joshua, this is like the other thing is, it's so strange being up here alone because usually Joshua is right there at the piano, and he's always just within arm's length. J. Raoul Brody, my friend and longtime collaborator, and those during the pandemic, we started doing nice recordings of my original stuff, and it's up on Bandcamp. Yeah, if you search Matthew Parafano, not just another pretty voice, you'll find some of my original stuff is up there. Plus, like the last 3 or stuff that I wrote recently, which also includes Mark's song, which is not, I can't, it's a very it's like the only personal song really personal song I've written. But I love it because it's a nice. I encourage you to check it out. It's a different kind of take on the AIDS epidemic. So, Joshua and I have been recording a Shakespeare Garden slowly but surely. We're in it right now, about 3 or 4 tracks away from completion, and I like to call it a concept album. Like Tommy or Jesus Christ Superstar. And I figure if it never gets to that, because I really do, as I'm writing it, I'm envisioning it. I see it staged. And if it never makes it to there, at least there'll be the album. There'll be that record of it. The other wonderful thing is really specificity. These 2 young people. I also wanted to acknowledge the Radical Fairy segment of the gay culture. I remember the second gay bar I went into, maybe in 1972, was the Stud in its first location on Folsom Street. And I remember walking through the door and looking around going, oh my God, gay hippies. I found my home. And so there's a whole segment when, the other thing is that the lovers meet, Romeo and Juliet met at the Capulets Ball, and Tony Maria met at the Dance in the Gym, and the lovers of Shakespeare Garden meet under a disco ball at the Stud. And from there, they spend a weekend up in the Russian River at a Radical Fairy gathering. And Cass, we just recorded Cass, Cass Brayton, who is a sister. Am I allowed to say that? It's not like The Residents, where they're totally anonymous. But yeah, I just recorded Cass reciting "Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds Admit Impediments," because there's a whole symbolic marriage ceremony between the 2 lovers, and then a protective spell from Midsummer Night's Dream that Michelle's going to help out with, and then they get back to the city, and then one of them gets sick, and so that's the new. So this is the first track of a Shakespeare Garden. And what I did was, it's a memory piece. So I finally took Sonnet 30, the one that had such a great impact on me. I finally set that to music. And because it's a memory piece, the way I envision it is if it's staged, there's an elderly man. I guess am I elderly? I don't know. Is that anyway? And he's in front of this beautiful, big flowering plum tree, and he remembers his relationship with with his friend, but he remembers it all through the lens of Shakespeare's verse. And sometimes there's just like a scene from one of the plays that just speaks to whatever's happening in this narrative. So I began with the first noble truth, as spoken by King Lear, who said, "Thou know'st the first time that we smell the air, we wail and cry." That's the truth of suffering. That's the first noble truth right there. And then it goes into, "Thou know'st the first time that we smell the air, we wail and cry. When we are born, we cry that we are come to this great stage of fools. We cry, we cry, we cry. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes new wail my dear time's waste. That's why it was so. Then can I drown an eye unused to flow for precious friends hid in death's dateless night, and weep afresh love's long since cancelled woe, and moan the expense of many a vanished side. Then can I grieve at grievances foregone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad account of forebemoaned moan, which I knew pay as if not paid before. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end, sorrows end, sorrows end, sorrows end. So, some Shakespeare Dharma. Okay, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you again for your patience. I have to figure out how to do this thing. Maybe it is just like a 2-hour show. I don't know. But because I've already left stuff out anyway. But Shakespeare Dharma. One of the things, one of my pleasures, great pleasures in life, is memorizing Shakespeare's verse, and basically learning it by heart. And for me, the process when I'm memorizing it, I see it in my mind. I see the actual words written out in my mind's eye, and then there comes a point where they just go someplace else. And I'm pretty sure that that place is right here. And because that's where it feels like, suddenly the words are just there. And, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence coming from heart transplant victims that possibly the organ itself can be a repository for memory. There are all these stories about people with heart transplants that come out of it with a whole new set of appetites and sometimes even memories. So for me, there are certain selections from Shakespeare that are like sutras to me, and so I'm just going to share a few with you. And as you like it. Probably the most famous speech in As You Like It is The 7 Ages of Man. But for me, my favorite speech happens, it's when we first meet Duke Sr. And his brother, so Shakespeare, there's this thing about brothers, in Shakespeare's plays. His brother has usurped the dukedom from him, and he's in exile, but he's brought with him a band of brothers, and they even mention like Robin Hood and his merry men, and so I imagine that As You Like It, I always imagine it as happening kind of at the cusp of winter into spring. So we first meet Duke Sr., and he's got all of his band together, and he says, "Now, my co-mates and brothers in exile, hath not old custom made this life more sweet than that of painted pomp? Are not these woods more free from peril than the envious court? Here feel we but the penalty of Adam, the seasons' differences, as the icy fang and churlish chiding of the winter's wind, which when it bites and blows upon my body, even till I shrink with cold, I smile and say, this is no flattery. These are counselors that feelingly persuade me what I am. Sweet are the uses of adversity, which like the toad ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head, and this our life, exempt from public haunts, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. I would not change it." What I love about that, the way for me it connects with the Dharma, is how does it? I forget. The idea that Dharma is everywhere, that you can find it in the trees, and in nature. It's just all around. And I'm reminded of, I've only had like maybe 2 transcendent experiences in my life, at least when I was not on drugs or anything. And one of them happened when I was washing dishes one day. I was standing at the sink, washing the dishes, when suddenly this feeling came over me, and I thought, this moment, me washing the dishes right here, right now, is no more important or less important than any other moment in my life. And what I was experiencing was being present. I mean, really present. And I thought, we strive to accomplish this and to acquire this, and really none of it's more important than just being present. And a year or two later, I came across a poem by this Chinese poet, Layman Pang, and that it really captured that feeling. He says, "My daily affairs are quite ordinary, but I am in total harmony with them. I don't hold on to anything, I don't reject anything. Nowhere an obstacle or conflict. Who cares about wealth and honor? Even the poorest thing shines. My miraculous power and spiritual activity, drawing water and carrying wood, or in my case, washing the dishes." And another little story about Layman Pang was he decided that his material possessions were a burden, and so he wanted to get rid of them. But he didn't want to give his he didn't want to give his stuff away because then he'd be burdening other people. So he took all of his possessions out into the middle of a lake and sunk them. That's Layman Pang. Oh, what?
Final thought.
Yeah. Okay, so I will just end with what I found one of the most. Oh, I'm sorry, and also that's Duke Senior's speech is also the idea of obstacles being the path. Sweet are the uses of adversity. When bad things happen, when circumstances are bad, instead of asking why me, it's you ask what can I learn from this. So, possibly one of the most profound speeches I've found is in The Tempest, Prospero's speech. In Buddhism, there's the Diamond Sutra, which ends with the idea that life, consider that life is all a shadow, illusion, a bubble, a flash of lightning, and all conditions should be considered in that way. and so what I'm going to do is recite Prospero's famous speech, which was kind of Shakespeare's Diamond Sutra, and then I'll end with the penultimate track. That's like a companion to the first track of. So, our revels now are ended. These our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherits shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a wreck behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. This track in the play is a little memorial service where the plum tree that we saw, the big plum tree that we saw at the beginning, is being planted as a sapling as part of the memorial service. So it's called In Memoriam. Thou know'st 'tis common all that live must die, passing through nature to eternity. Passing through nature to eternity. that's nature's mother, is her tomb. What is her burying grave? That is her womb. And from her womb, children of diverse kind, we sucking on her natural bosom find. Many, many for many virtues excellent, none but for some, and yet all different, and yet all different. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. Thank you so much. Yeah, so